What's up, Pitt fans? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. I'm Noah Hiles. He is Chris Carter. Carter, long weekend. Good weekend for me. As you can see, I got a little bit of color from this game.
Yes, sir.
Coming
You
back
got to
from
chill on Miami. That was not a long weekend for you. You
It
was
was a
having
long
a
weekend of relaxation. I just feel like it was a long week. 3 road games for Pitt, 2 wins, 1 loss. We also got to talk to a couple of football guys, newcomers through the transfer portal. So we got a lot to talk about. Before we do, let's just talk about the show's presenting sponsor, which is Mike's Beer Bar. Whether if you're in town for a Steelers, Pirates, or Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar is right across the street from PNC Park and has the best selection of beer in town, as well as amazing food options. They have over 20 TVs, and you can catch all of your NFL, college football, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, and Premier League action right at Mike's. Come on in and try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of them being local beers, as well as their 80 different local craft beers available on tap. You can also get a flight to try out every option you can dream of, and trust me, you won't run out of favorites because I never do, and I'm always there. Try their steak on a stone for an awesome meal where you can choose how hot you want your steak cooked with a heated stone right in front of you as you enjoy a night out in Pittsburgh. Come on into Mike's Beer Bar and get your sports fix and experience the best bar in the Steel City. Carter, a lot of questions to get into here. I kind of like Greg starting us off, and we don't have to spend a ton of time debating this, like the actual strategy behind it, because obviously there was – actually, real quick, what would you have done if you were Dan Campbell?
I would have kicked both field goals, but I'm also I'm very much of the old school thought. Like it's different in the regular season when you are on the road against a team like the Niners, and you need to keep your foot on their throats. You do not give them any sense of momentum. You kick that field goal, and if you miss it, you miss it. But if you get stopped, that gives them the belief. And Nick Bosa said it after the game. He's like, "That's when we knew we had a shot." And I think you kick that field goal.
You take the better route to a 3-score game in the second half. And
I agree.
Like, if you make that field goal, you negate their first drive. You negate any sort of progress that just happened in the second half there. And you're back to a 7-point. Their deficit is exactly what it was when they came out of the locker room. So their most successful drive they've had since the first quarter is what it is. But Greg wants to ask, if Pat Narduzzi was in the same spot as Dan Campbell, what do you think he would have done? And I love this question.
This is hilarious.
I think Pat, he might punt. No, I'm just kidding. I think
Pat kicks because he trusts his kickers.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about it. And that's not to say that Pat's not aggressive. I think there have been times throughout his career where he has been aggressive. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, he kicked with, what was that? Was that Blewett who made the kick at Clemson? Yeah. He missed earlier in the game. So, Ben Sauls, he's given plenty of opportunities too in games. So, yeah, I think Pat definitely takes the points there. I don't think he's anywhere near as analytically driven as Dan Campbell or just even aggressive on fourth down. I think Pat can find spots in games where he's saying, you know what, we're doing this. But I think he's a lot more of a feel guy than a chart guy. And Dan Campbell probably could have used a little bit of that actually last night. So that's my thought. Anything else to add on that, Carter?
I think that it's because Dan Campbell also, I think it's important to remember, like, Dan Campbell is very much, I'm not sure if he's the analytical guy much as, his offensive coordinator, is. And I think that Dan Campbell, when you have something strong, you go with it. Because, like, when he had the offense that was humming, Mike Tomlin went for on fourth down a lot. I think it's about leaning to your strengths, and the offense for the Lions was a strength. But in that situation, I would have done it. But I also feel like I'm not going to sit here and say that Dan Campbell was the biggest reason why the Lions lost. They needed to not fumble, after the first touchdown. They needed to catch the interception that was thrown right to their hands.
Catch anything. Just hold on to a football when it hits your hands.
Right.
If it's handed to you,
exactly.
If it's thrown to you by your teammate, if it's thrown to you by the other team, just catch the ball.
Yeah. And Yeah, so it's not to me. I think that it was a mistake, and I think it was a costly mistake, and one that I think if you don't like a coach, you can use against them. But if you're being honest, it's like, yeah, they need to learn from that. But that wasn't the biggest reason why they lost. But yeah, Pat would take the points there. I think that's
Pat would take the points there too. All right, Landon wants to know. Pat Narduzzi told the ACC. We got 2 questions from Landon, so this is the first one. Pat Narduzzi told the ACC network last week that Nate Yarnell was the team's starting quarterback. He also made it seem like they will be running the ball quite often. Do you view this as him already micromanaging his new offensive coordinator? Carter, I'll let you start with this.
I don't trust nothing that Pat Narduzzi is telling the ACC network right now. That man is all about smoke screens. I have covered him when he was straight up like, oh, yeah, Kenny Pickett's fine. Then Kenny Pickett wouldn't be playing. And then, oh, yeah, we're planning on going with Joe Yellen. Then Kenny Pickett was back. Like, I've seen it for years. I think that Pat Narduzzi loves that there's a mystery for his quarterback room. He does not want us to figure it out. He doesn't want you to break the news again on him. He wants to make sure that everything is behind closed doors. So he'll say, yeah, Nate Yarnell, because he's the guy right now. But I don't for one sec put much stock into it. They're going to go into spring camp. They're going to see who does well there, and then that'll give us a little bit of an inkling, and then we'll see how it plays out from there. But I don't put much stock into this right now. And honestly, I don't think Pat Narduzzi is going to micromanage the OC, and particularly because he had to fire a lot of the guys that he trusted for a long time. Andre Powell, Tim Salem, 2 guys. And you could throw Borbs in there, but those 2 guys specifically, Powell and Salem, have been with him since he got here, and he was forced to let them go. If I'm Pat Narduzzi, I probably wouldn't. If I was Pat Narduzzi, I don't think he would have done that unless it was kind of part of a, hey, we need to flip up a lot of things on offense, and clearly what you've been doing ain't working. We're going to go with this new guy, and we're going to give him some autonomy. Not complete autonomy, but some.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll say this about the Yarnell thing. I mean, he said this when the season ended. Before he fired an offensive coordinator, before he hired an offensive coordinator, before he brought in another quarterback through the portal, this is what he said. This is a guy that he picked. He made the call that Yarnell was starting those last 2 games. That wasn't Frank's call, like he said the other decisions were.
That's true.
So
that's true.
This is what he wanted. And so and Pat Narduzzi has to say this. He can't just go back on his word before the spring season starts. Now, the moment spring ball starts and you actually see Eli Holstein throw a ball in Kade Bell's offense, or you see Christian Veyer throw a ball in Kade Bell's offense, that might change. But they have not started organized practices yet. They're just working out.
Right.
I mean, one of the 3 quarterbacks competing for the position just moved into the city like 2 weeks ago. So, he's got to say Yarnell. Of course, right now, Yarnell. But the spring season hasn't started yet. The offense, I mean, Kade Bell, I don't even know if he has a house in Pittsburgh yet. He's been on the road recruiting since he's got the job. So, I don't know how much of this offense is already even being installed at this point. I'm sure they're looking through it. I'm sure there have been meetings, and I know the team has met with him. But yeah, like I just don't think there's anything for him to say otherwise right now. It's the competition hasn't started yet. So you got to go with what you ended your last year on. And what he said at the post-game presser after Duke was that Yarnell was going into the offseason as the starter. So that doesn't surprise me. As far as micromanagement goes, I wouldn't call it micromanaging, but I do expect Pat Narduzzi to have maybe a wish list for Kade Bell. He's going to say, look, I'm going to let you do what you want to do, but I need you to check a couple of boxes for me. I need you to have a scheme that does not turn the ball over, because I think Pat Narduzzi hates turnovers more than probably anything in life aside from losing. Like, it's losing, then turnovers, and then, questions from me. And then, but I'm just kidding. But overall, in a serious note, like, he doesn't like turnovers. So that's probably one thing. He's like, I want splash plays, but I want them to come with, without a ton of risk. And I think another thing is, yes, he does want there to be a ground game. Now, what him telling the ACC that there's going to be a lot of running, who knows? Again, these players have not even started practicing the offense yet officially. So I think he does want a run game just because he wants his defense to be fresh. That's always his philosophy. And you could talk about any coach in the country, at college or professional. And even if they are defensive guys or a CEO, they want to let their offensive coordinator have freedom. And even the offensive coordinators with the most freedom they still have to go within the parameters of what their head coach's overall vision of the team is. And if his vision is, we can't have our defense on the field for 40 minutes, then that's what you got to do. So I don't call that micromanaging. I think that that's just having your employee operate within your guidelines as a head coach. So that's what I would have to say on that. Is that fair, Carter?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Landon, part 2, wants to know, man, Landon's been tuning into the ACC network. Another thing, Narduzzi's recent comments to the ACC network. In another interview, Pat was asked what he had learned from last season, to which he said there were things he couldn't mention. That's a very Pat answer. What do you think he was talking about? I think if I had to guess, not even off of guess, going off of what I've had, discussions that I've had in the offseason since these new hires have been made, particularly since Kade Bell was made, I think the difference we're going to see in practice is a lot more team instruction for offense. I think there was a lot of individualized position coaching when you can do that. You can get your offensive lines timing down and your receivers can run some crisp routes. But I think it's fair to say that the 11 men on the field for Pitt's offense were rarely on the same page.
I agree.
There was a lot of false starts. There were a lot of fumbled handoffs. There were a lot of illegal shifts or formations. There were just a lot of self-imposed mistakes. And so maybe what he's saying here, where he talked, because the quote, he said there were some things we weren't doing in practice that he couldn't mention. He's obviously not going to tell you his program's biggest flaws on national television. That's right. He's smarter than that. But I think that there's probably what he's probably alluding to is there needs to be more group instruction. And I think that that's going to be something that we see with Kade Bell. I think there's going to be more of a focus of, hey, we need to work on things together. That way you're more comfortable practicing with these blocks with a running back actually running behind you while you're making them, or making this throw with your center standing in front of you and throwing through windows. I think that's going to be more of a focus.
I think part of what he was referring to, one, is the fact that that was his first ever. Was that his first losing season? No, he was 5-7
Second.
once.
Yeah.
Second. So it was the second losing season in a long time at Pitt. Worst season by far, 3-9. I bet you there's a lot of things Pat Narduzzi can say he learned about last year. But I think one thing that will take priority is probably involving the instruction. And Pat's a guy, he doesn't want to throw his coaches under the bus unless their name's Mark Whipple. But other than him. And I guess Frank's kind of got there too with the whole.
Oh yeah, Frank has some tire traps on his.
Never mind.
On his coat.
So Kade Bell, you better watch out. But no, seriously, but like guys like Salem, guys like Powell, guys who have been loyal to Pat and he's been loyal to them. And I know for a fact that like there is a lot of trust among all, and not just those guys, but like guys on the defensive side of the ball. There's a reason they want to stick around. They like working with Pat Narduzzi. They think that they have there's a trust factor there that they can carry with them wherever they go, and they want to have that. Pat Narduzzi, he fought for his assistants to get raises as soon as they won the ACC championship because he was like, no, we got to keep this crew together. I think that there are probably some coaching things that he probably felt like, hey, in the past, and we've asked him this question during the season, and he kind of illuminated on a little bit. We've asked him, like, when you see something that you think shouldn't be the way it is, like you disagree with it, when do you step in, or when do you trust the coach that's handling that situation to handle it? And he said that's part of the toughest decisions in coaching, because there's sometimes I disagree, but then there's plenty of times I've disagreed, and then we've gone into a game, and that's been the thing that's won us the game. And he's like, sometimes you have to trust your coaches. The best coaches are the ones that balance it and get it right a lot more often than not. And I think that that's where he probably saw some things last year that he didn't think that was the way it should be approached, and he kind of kept his hands off it until it was and then it didn't work out, and it cost the team. So I wonder what will that pace be with this new staff coming in, guys that are going to be new to the program. He doesn't have those relationships with him that he did have with these other guys. That's going to be an interesting question, and I think it's going to be a big challenge to manage the coaching staff in a way when you got these guys coming in. And I'll be intrigued to see how he handles them, if it's any similar to how he's handled other guys.
Yeah, and I want to make something really clear here before we move on. I'm not sitting here suggesting that they didn't do any team instruction last year or over the past 2 years under Cignetti. They did. I'm saying that it clearly wasn't enough based off of how they looked. Yeah, they weren't a cohesive unit. And so I think that, and again, this is off of a conversations I've had with sources, who were around last year and who are coming in this year. And I think that there is a new vision about how they're going to go about constructing their practices. We'll see how that goes. But I'm not sitting here saying that they never did group instruction, because that would be incorrect to say. I know they did group instruction. They just probably didn't do enough of it. Anyway, we'll move on to basketball now. This is an interesting question from George. He wants to know, at what point is good effort not enough for Jeff Capel? I understand that this is a young team, but we are far past the beginning stages of him trying to build a program. Is it wrong to be frustrated with the sense of pride that still comes with moral victories? You want to start here, Chris, or shall I?
Sure, I could take this here. I think part of it is acknowledging what kind of team this was this year. Like, both Noah and I came into the season and was like, we don't know if this is a tournament team. This is the team with young guards. We need to see what they was doing. There was certainly some promise early on, but we said the bumps were coming in the road, and they've certainly hit those bumps. With freshman guards, with a front court that needed to prove itself. The Twins had not bulked up. They, the guy that might have been, the answer for them at the 5, over Federico and Papa Conte got hurt before the season started. And then these aren't excuses. These are just realistic. These are the things that Pitt's going through right now. And they had last year, they won with a team that was able to reestablish some culture for the program that hadn't really been there to anything to build upon in the years prior. So yeah, it's not the same as the beginning stages for him. I think you kind of give a wash for the first 3 years of Capel, and then when you look at what else kept happening, players just making, getting arrested, away from the program, injuries at the exact wrong times, Nike Savande getting knocked out at the start of the season before they even get on the court. They faced a lot of adversity. So I agree. Listen, I hear the frustrations. It's tough. But I think it depends on who you're talking about the frustrations from, because a lot of people at the end of the game, and no, I want to get your thoughts on this here. A lot of people at the end of the game said that was the worst play call that they could have called for Jalen, to give the ball to Jalen Lowe in that situation. And I was like, I'm not going to say it's the worst, because you know what? They got him one-on-one with a center out of position. I think you wanted to see, hey, that kid just drained a shot over Kyle Filipowski in a must-have situation in an extremely hostile environment a week before that game. I was okay with giving Jalen Lowe a chance to be the decision making here. It didn't work out. He also got fouled. But I think that there's times we look at how things play out, and because things didn't work, we say, oh, this is on coaching and this is on that. I think that if this was a team that if Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe were juniors and they had been on the team and they'd been excelling for years, and they had brought in all this other talent, and this was the team that was supposed to be a top-level ACC team, I would hear you. But do not put the weight of the failures of Xavier Johnson and Audis Toney in those years on this team, because they're struggling right now with what's clearly a very young squad. I think Jeff Capel is doing a good job developing guys. I think that he needs to add more pieces after this season is over. And I still think they can make an interesting push here and be a bit better contender in the ACC as this season goes on. But I think that part of this frustration is building off of the past failures that's just been Pitt basketball since Jamie Dixon left.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. But I want to say on a different note, I mean, what do you want him to say? There's just certain things that it's coach speak.
We suck, and guys.
Well, we lost again. Questions, you got to point out your effort. That's just it's. I don't really like those quotes. Every post game presser from Jeff starts off. First off, got to give credit to Team X if they lose, or first off. He always gives credit to the opposition to open. He already says credit to Team X. And if they won, they played a great game, blah, blah, blah. Or if they lost, if Pitt beat that team, he'll say, they were a tough opponent, blah, blah, blah. That's just a formula of rhetoric on his end. And I get why it seems redundant to fans who have been waiting for him to make this a more stable program over the last, whatever it's been now, 5-6 years. But yeah, like, what else do you want him to say in those areas? His team did keep fighting. And I understand that you got to start finishing those battles. And it's okay to be frustrated that they're not finishing those battles. He's frustrated too. But again, what do you want him to say there? And I mean, I can tell you what I want him to say. I want him to say, this is X player's fault, because that's going to be a lot more of an entertaining story to write. But that's not good for Jeff. That's not good for the team. That's not good for the program. He has to be composed. He has to say the right things rather than maybe what's actually on his mind. He's pissed. He's not sitting there going home afterwards being like, he doesn't get off the podium and then skip to the locker room and be like, golly gee, my team had a great effort today. I could care less about the result. It's not who he is. He's livid. I'm most road games, I make the walk with him back to the locker room to talk to players. It's an awkward walk. It's an awkward walk. He is not in the mood for small talk after those losses. And I get it. He has to just say what he has to say. He's frustrated. He wants to win just as bad as all these fans want Pitt to win. I can promise you that. And I don't think they're super far away. As far as the play call goes, Carter, I agree. I thought it was a good call. First off, Jalen Lowe's been this team's best player over the last month.
Yep.
There's no debating it. I mean, we could talk about Blake's individual effort against Duke. That was the best single game performance. But if you look at what Jalen Lowe has done really since Christmas break, since December 30th to now, so this comes out on January 30th, over the last month, Jalen Lowe has been the most efficient player. He has shot the basketball the best inside and outside. He's the only guard that can consistently get to the rim. He doesn't get into foul trouble. He makes shots. I mean, he was the reason they fought their way back into that game. He was the difference maker in that game.
Absolutely.
You put the ball in your player's best hands, or your best player's hands. Jalen Lowe's the best player on this team right now. Blake is the most established player. He's the leader, and he can be the biggest difference maker. But Jalen Lowe is the best player on the team. Jeff said after the game he wanted it in a guard's hands. They put it in their best guard's hands. There are other options. But Jeff can't make him go with a different option. He can draw up a play and say, these are your options. Like you pointed out, Carter, he got a one-on-one isolation opportunity with 5 seconds left at the elbow, a spot that he's pretty good from, against a center. And not a tall center for that matter. Yeah. He's 6'7", 6'7", maybe 7, like 5 inches taller than Lowe. A guy who shot a three-pointer in the eye of a guy who's 11 inches taller than him the weekend prior. So he got the look that he wanted. It is what it is. It didn't work out. I understand that some people wanted Blake to take that shot. Blake had a chance to take that shot. But Jeff drew up a play to get his best current player the ball and let the cards fall where they went. And it just didn't work out.
I think one thing on the note that you said about, Jeff Capel not skipping to the locker room after a win, like he's happy. I think it's very funny. People do not understand the first elements of today's coaching. You cannot, back in the day, if you were a coach, you could crush whoever you wanted. In the media, whoever, because you know why? Because they couldn't go nowhere because there were no other options. You cannot do that in today's call any sport, not even that's why NFL coaches are struggling, because you know what? NFL players can be like, you know what? Trade me. I'm just
or
not
I'll sit out.
Yeah. So like people have to understand like the military, like, oh, I'm going to put my fist down on this guy and he's just going to have to listen. You can't play that card all but like maybe 1 or 2 times. And because the thing is, you got to make it count. Even Chuck Noll used to be like that. Like there were times that he wouldn't get angry until it was the right moment. And that was back when you could just do whatever you wanted. Right. You could tell Bell Blunt, sue me. I literally do not care. You will be playing cornerback for us next year. For Jeff, he has to not only, I think one of the best things that he said this year was when he was talking about how he works with, how he coaches guys. You tell them the truth. You put confidence in them. You believe in them, and you get them to believe in themselves. But it doesn't mean you don't lie. It doesn't mean you lie to them and say, "Hey, you're doing great," when you're not. But you tell them the truth, and you put confidence in them. That's what coaching is nowadays, and I think that's what. And if anyone wants him to just be like, Jalen Lowe is an idiot there, that'd be the dumbest thing you could do. And if Jeff Capel said that, I would say, yeah, then he has to go. But he's never done that to any of his players.
And that's why the guys who do that aren't around anymore. That's why so many of these old school coaches are retiring from college football, college basketball. because it's a transactional game. It's free agency every year.
Yep.
And in any sport, you got to be careful what you say about your free agents, because one thing can lead them a step closer to the plank. So I completely agree. And he's said this to us a million times, that you can't say that anymore. It's just not a productive, like, overall, even if they don't have the freedom, it's not productive to just crap on 18-year-olds. Like, there's a way to do it with building confidence. It's a way to hold people accountable while also installing confidence. And I think Jeff toes that line pretty well. On the note of confidence and accountability, Mike wants to know, which of the forwards on Pitt's roster do you feel provide the most long-term value? I'll start with this. I'll say Papa Kante.
I was just gonna say that's my answer too.
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know what you do with the front court guys right now. If you're Pitt moving, like, I like. It's hard to imagine a world where only one Diaz-Graham twin is around, right? But I don't know what your roster gains from having Jorge there. If what has he really displayed through 2 seasons? If he's out for the year, which I've been told, what are you getting with having him as a junior? If Amde comes in next year and he's just as good of a player as a freshman, then, like, didn't they just kind of do that same thing with Nate Santos this last offseason? And Will Jeffress, same thing. He's got eligibility, but can you find someone with more value than him in the portal? I get he's a leader, but what's that leadership brought this year? 12 wins? So that, and even Guillermo, who is probably their most productive, at least offensive big, can you go get that elsewhere in the portal? Probably. I don't think, and, like, obviously you don't want to just completely blow up your front court and everything, but Pitt isn't a team where it's like you can just go out and get a Hunter Dickinson in the transfer portal. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying with what they have right now, value-wise, Pitt can't afford to replace it pretty easily through the portal. You're not getting a ton. I think Fetty still has the most long-term value because of what we have seen him do. And Guillermo's not far behind, because I think Guillermo can be a decent player. But with Jeffress, with Jorge, I don't see, unless something changes this year. And I understand that they're both great to talk to. They're both good kids, and they deserve to be at Pitt. But I don't know if you're better off bringing both of them back next year. So the most long-term value is somebody that is completely unproven, and that's Kante. I think that's my answer.
Listen, Kante it presents a really good chance to reset what they want to do in the front court. This is, I think that's another part of this, was that Federico was never supposed to be the star, or not the star, but he was never supposed to be the guy that drove the forwards as far as the paint play. That was always supposed to be John Hughley. And then John Hughley did what John Hughley did. And so he's out of the program. And so they've had to reset things. The Twins were supposed to also be support in that department. Like, if things had worked the way that, you'd hope that it worked for Pitt, John Hughley would be the starting center right now. He would be really physical. He would be helping Pitt dominate the paint. This would be a whole different looking team. They're reeling from that. Kante came in. He was supposed to help with that. Maybe not be dominant, but be the guy that could emerge the way that Jalen and Bub have emerged for them. He got hurt. He's out there. So Kante's the obvious answer. But I'll say this about Guillermo. I think that Guillermo, he's getting better with knowing when to do certain things. I also think he is getting stronger. Like, he's still not where you want him. He still gets knocked over very easily. But I remember, not that he was as, light in weight as Guillermo, but I remember Aaron Gray when he first got to Pitt in his first two years. There were times he looked completely useless. Like despite his 7 foot, like there were times he was just like that guy. He's not built for this. And it was like late his junior year, that guy figured it out. And it was like, oh, That's what they've been working on. And then his senior year, he was a bad man. And like it took time to develop. And who knows, maybe it'll take Guillermo and Jorge time to develop into being those types of players. Guillermo's clearly an asset right now to the team. You want him to be a better asset than he is, but I think that there's ways to grow there. So I'll still say Guillermo as far as players that are playing right now, because I think in 2 years' time, he can grow into a much more dangerous player than he currently is. I think that Jorge can as well. He's injured, like you said, but I think that they still have potential there, but that should not stop anybody from reinvesting and going and getting in better players. That's just today's college basketball. Just like players can leave you can go and get better players. Pitt's got to do that next year. I think they cannot just come back and just hope everything's going to be hunky dory with the front court.
All right, and we wrap this one up with a question from one of my favorite accounts on Twitter, Ghost of Whip. Just very entertaining.
Salute
Twitter
to
account.
Ghost. He's hilarious.
Shouldn't he be Ghost of Signetti now?
Nah, Mark Whipple's too legendary for that. And not against Frank, but like Whip had some great liners out there, man.
All right, fair enough. He wants to know, this is a fun one. If you were able to take one player off of each of Pitt's rivals, in this case, West Virginia and Penn State, what two current players on the rivals' teams would you bring on to Pitt's current roster to improve it? So Carter and I did a little bit of we doctored this question a little bit. So he's going to go with football, and he's going to go with last year's football team.
Yeah.
So a player from last year's Penn State team and a player from last year's West Virginia team that could have improved Pitt. I am going to go with current basketball players from Penn State and West Virginia. Chris, who do you have for football?
For Penn State, I'm beefing up what should have been the biggest strength for Pitt last year. That's its offensive line. Penn State, you go get Oli Fashanu, the guy that's going to go top 10 in this year in the NFL draft. You add that tackle to Pitt's offensive line. Whoo, boy, they are doing some damage. And then I'm going to double up and go and get Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, another dude who's going to go, at least the third round. But I think he could go the second round. And shout out to Jake Cradle. He's the man. Love Jake. He's done a lot of great things for the program. But Zach Frazier's going to the NFL. Yeah. And I'd say move Jake to guard, which he's done. He can be versatile.
He did.
But you add those two stars to the Pitt's offensive line. Rodney would have been running people over. Sebo would run. That team would have been so much different. And I still think maybe Phil's probably still struggles, throughout the year and stuff. But like you would have been so much easier to mask that with that dominant of an offensive line, because those would have been two NFL players on your O-line. It would have made this another great draft class for Pitt, because then I think that the team would have been better. And then maybe MJ Devonshire, Marquez Williams, AJ Woods, they're being looked at in a different way. Also, shout out to AJ Woods. He apparently did impress some really good people at the Shrine Bowl. So good for him. Marquez out there still proving it. I think that those guys, they'd get a little bit more play because Pitt would have been a better team this year. So those are my two. Who are your guys?
Yeah, I mean, imagining an offensive line with Gonsalves and then the Penn State guy as the tackles it's a pretty good offensive line, So my two for basketball, I think the obvious of the two here is Jesse Edwards, putting him at center, plucking him from West Virginia. I mean, he was a guy that was really good at Syracuse, and just having any sort of defensive presence in the paint, with also paired with competence on the offensive end. That's exactly what this team could use right now. And another thing they could use is a veteran point guard. So that's why I'm plucking Ace Baldwin Jr. from Penn State, a guy who took VCU to the tournament last year, a guy who gave Pitt, some problems last year. So yeah, I like Ace Baldwin and Jesse Edwards as my two picks for me. So that's it. Carter, another mailbag in the books. Any final thoughts?
Just excited to see what Pitt does when they return home after the long road trip. Do they reset things? They get a chance to play Wednesday, so they get an extra day off there. So I'll be intrigued to see that. Stop by as always and see us in the press box if you're headed to the Pete. Always happy to chat with people who are fans of this show and fans of our work.
Yes, absolutely. We will have a lot of good stuff coming out this week. Pitt with a big game Wednesday against Wake Forest, like Carter talked about. We'll also be talking to a couple of players, newcomers from Pitt football, including one Eli Holstein. He will be talking with us this week on the South Side. So a lot of good stuff to look forward to as far as our coverage. You can check out all of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sports coverage at post-gazette.com. And you can check out all of our commentary here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. He is Chris Carter. I'm Noah Hiles. We're signing off saying we'll see you next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.